We're going to tell you a completely fresh story today. So let's get started. Jan Wilson and Pete had been happily married for a decade and a half. For her, Pete was everything. He was the steadfast foundation of her existence. Following Stephanie, their sexual lives became fairly conventional and monotonous. Despite the fact that their sole child had been born 3 years earlier, she remained devoted to him. Jan worked at the steel company for the preceding 8 years. Dear Brad Jennings, an attractive and captivating young man had recently taken over as her new supervisor from the previous woman. When January realized Brad was over 7 years younger than her enthusiasm grew. Not that she considered him Pete's heir. She pondered having sex with him. She would not take her gaze away from Brad, even if he was talking to someone else or simply walking by. She had begun to imagine all of the things she and Brad would do to one another. She never attempted to act on these ideas, she merely regarded them as her own filthy thoughts. However, she has recently found herself completely immersed in these fantasies when awake. She was beginning to feel uneasy and couldn't stop thinking of Brad. Pete had seen numerous times that she looked to be lost in her own thoughts. It seems that her only thoughts were of imagined sex actions with Bradley. She seemed to grow more aggressive with Pete as a result of this. They requested him to perform certain things with their lovemaking that they had not done in a long time. But she couldn't stop thinking about Brad delivering it to her, even as Pete was rising to a climax. She would have been content to continue living out her fantasies, but something occurred to her that made them come real. Brad had asked that she stay late to complete a contract proposal for a major customer. When they worked in the evenings, he was the definition of a gentleman. After reviewing the final text of their proposal, Brad nodded and grinned. Yes, this is wonderful. January, thank you very much. As a thank you for a job well done, how about I buy you dinner? After considerable deliberation, Jan's desire eventually won over her logic. Okay, to relieve Pete's concern, I'll phone him and let him know. After calling their residence, she told Pete, Hey Pete, I did so much better tonight than he did tonight. He wants to buy me dinner on the company as a thank you, isn't that amazing? So I will be a little later getting home. Pete was happy for her. She had expressed concerns to Pete several times since Brad had become the boss that Brad didn't think much of her work because he never gave her any praise or acknowledged the quality of her work. You are finally getting some well-deserved recognition. Enjoy the dinner. They both hung up. Brad drove Jan to the most posh restaurant in the city. He was suave, funny, and attentive to John before and during the lovely candlelight dinner. He told her about his life. He was a Stanford graduate, divorced for a year, with one daughter he got to see weekly. He loved his daughter and showed her pictures of them together. He still thought he had feelings for his ex, but hoped to eventually lose the mental anchor and get back to having a relationship. Brad looked at Jan with a flare in his eyes as they waited at the door for the valet to bring Brad's car around. Brad put his arm around Jan's shoulder and kissed her cheek. Jan, against her better judgment, put her arm around Brad's waist and lightly kissed his lips. Here's a kiss for being a great boss. Brad drove them to his apartment, and they immediately fell into Brad's king-size bed and explored each other's bodies for several hours. He did things to her that Pete had never done, and it was well after 1 a.m. when they lay exhausted together. Jan looked at the clock and said, Brad, I have to get home. I really should not have done this, but you have been a fantastic. But understand, I don't love you, I just want to have sex with you. I love my family and will do nothing to jeopardize that relationship, but I will do things with you that I would never do with my husband. They then stood and, moving to the shower, cleaned the evidence of sex from their bodies. Nothing quickly. Brad drove her back to her car at the office. They French kissed in the car for several minutes, and then Jan broke away. Enough for now. I have to get They were sexual creatures. Brad stated that he hadn't had sex in over a year since his divorce and that he desired a sexual release. Jan said that she wants to spice up her life with some wild and kinky years of sex. She was even beginning to make more direct suggestions to Pete about trying new things. Pete saw her proposal to take her in a different way with suspicion. Honey, where did you learn about this? She was immediately flooded with regret. She slumped and whirled around, facing Pete. I've been reading way too many sex books lately, honey. If I gave a proposal that you do not want to follow, I apologize. Pete made a headshake. That is not what it is, however. You just seem confrontational to me these days. Furthermore, it appears that you have previously completed the duties you are requesting that I execute. You're acting like my teacher. Not like my lover. Jan almost panicked. I'm so sorry, dear. I just thought we could try some new things. I promise to stop reading the books that are giving me these ideas. Pete just smiled and hugged her. You can read whatever you want. Just give me time to adjust to trying this new stuff. Okay. Jan went to work the next day. She closed the door. She told Brad they'd have to cool it. Cool it for a while at least. My husband is getting Jan moaned as Brad deceived her. You really should tell Pete that we are having sex, not as lovers but as friends with benefits, as they say today. It would certainly relieve you of the guilt you've seemed to feel, and make our relationship open and above board. Pete would just have to understand that you were just scratching an itch and that it means nothing to either of us. Pete would be crushed if he found out about Brad through some careless action or remark from her. Jan discussed this with Brad twice more as they rutted with each other at Brad's flat. I think I do need to tell Pete about us. He would be crushed if he found out about us through some stupid accidental event. I think I can make him understand that this is just a fling, and when it is over, things will be just as they were, except we will have a much better sex life. Jan responded. Pete had just completed his shower when he arrived home from work earlier than Jan. He had planned to take her and their daughter out for dinner this evening. He treasured their family dinners together. His life revolved on these two women. When he opened the shower door, he witnessed a small drop of water form within the glass. Water appears to have gotten in between the door's two glass panes. It was difficult to miss the little water bubble, because it was at eye level. Pete thought to himself, I guess I'd better get that door fixed. It should not be able to contain water. As a result, we have two options: disassemble the door and rebuild it, or throw it away and get a replacement. Pete went away and began getting dressed. When Jan entered, he was still yanking on his trousers. Hello, my darling. She said, Hello, yourself, it is time for you to make dinner. You were running a little late, Pete replied. Pete had no idea that Jan had stopped by Brad's on the way home, and now had his juices running down her thigh. This was the first time she had actually brought signs of Brad home with her, but she had needed fortification that what she was going to tell Pete tonight was the right thing to do. Brad had screwed her, and they had talked through what Jan would say to Pete. Jan turned on the shower and closed the S. Pete took that opportunity to tell her about the problem with the door and the drop of water. He told her that the door would have to be rebuilt or replaced. She began to slowly undress, and when she got through her panties and bra, Pete sucked in his breath. Jan, what? What is that on your thigh? It looks like semen, Pete asked nervously. It is, my darling. But let me explain, okay? It is not what you think. Jan began. You see, Brad and I have Pete cut her off. Pete jumped up. Don't you touch me. You dare to have an affair? Cheat on me and then bring the other man's juices into our bedroom? Get out of my sight. Just get out. No, Pete, this is my house too. There is no need for anyone to leave anyone. Jan felt good about the way she was ensuring Pete that the affair meant nothing. Pete grabbed an overnight bag from the closet and began throwing shaving gear, pants and a fresh work shirt in it. Well, my dear, if you will not leave, I will. I cannot live with a stranger, and you are a stranger. I don't know who you are. I will leave word where I will be in a day or so. But her right. Who the hell are you? Pete, it is me. I was just stunned by your reaction. You never lifted your hand against me in all of our married life. I just responded, I am sorry, it was wrong to do. Are you apologizing for slapping me or cheating on me? Pete said in a level tone. My thing with Brad is not cheating. There is no love, it is just lust. And you are benefiting from it. Hasn't our sex life been great since I started screwing Brad? Have you wanted for anything? Have I been less than the wife you married? Have you lost from my little games with Brad? What have I lost? I lost ever trusting you again. I lost my best friend and my lover. I have lost more than you can imagine. Don't you see that? No, I don't. Suddenly Jan brightened. Look, I know how to put this. Remember that water bubble in the shower door you just told me about? Well, what I have done and will continue to do until I get it out of my system is no more than that water drop in the shower door. Jan went on. Does it affect the usefulness or integrity of the door? Pete paused for a moment. Jen, I love you and always will, but I can't accept that your fling isn't harming our relationship. For the time being, I'll leave you to do what you think is best. Just remember that when that water bubble vanishes, the glass is still pristine and the bathroom floor is still dry. Jan called Brad and told him what had just happened. Brad suggested she come back to his place, but Jan refused, saying she needed some alone time. Jan still thought Pete had overreacted and would soon come to his senses. Her marriage was great and could overcome this little indiscretion on Jen's part. Jan fell asleep dreaming of another sex bout with Brad. Brad was sympathetic to Jen's home crisis, but he also wanted to continue being with Jen as she was. He had been looking at a brochure for the Eastern Caribbean, which was a 2-week cruise visiting over a dozen ports. Since it was now winter and cold, 2 weeks in the Caribbean sounded great. Jen still wasn't staying all night with Brad. She would come to his place for a few hours and then go home. She was hoping that Pete would call or stop by to discuss their problems, but Pete refused to return home as long as Jen continued her affair with Brad. Brad had come to Jen's house in an attempt to get to spend the night with her. Jen had sent her daughter to stay with a girlfriend for the evening. As they had nestled into Pete's marital bed, the phone rang. It was Pete. He was livid when he found out that Brad was there. Jen also became hysterical when it dawned on her that she was about to have sex with Brad in what should have been Pete's sole territory. Jen had asked Brad to leave, and she would see him the next. I just booked us on a 2-week Caribbean cruise, so we can share ourselves without worrying about what Pete thinks. If you come with me on the cruise, I bet Pete will beat a path to your door to get you back when we return, and he will be so jealous that he will have to come to his senses. Jen had been thinking that this whole thing with Brad was far too costly, and her lust had hurt the one man she loved above all. She thought, I need just a little quality time with Brad. You may remain at our place and look after our kid while I am away for 2 weeks. All right. By the way, the shower door is still leaking water. Although slightly larger than before, there is no discernible injury. You're up to the task as long as you're present. Remember my comment about the water bubble inside the door? It is still true, however. Jen and Brad left on a 2-week cruise together. Jen was over Brad after 10 days. The ideal had turned into a bitter reality. They have nothing in common other than sex. Essentially, he treated her like a blow-up doll while they were on the vacation. He wanted to have sex immediately away when they woke up in the morning. She insisted on waiting until they finished cleaning. She was turned off by the unpleasant odor emanating from his lips in the mornings. Brad snorted so loudly that she had difficulty sleeping. She rattled her phantom lover's armor. She pondered. He had been intoxicated on the 7th night at sea, and during an argument about Jen's decision to end the affair when she returned home, he slapped her face with his open hand. Later, he expressed sorrow, but it was too late. Jen's enthusiasm for her fantasy had waned after 14 days. They flew home after landing at the port on the 14th day. I had enough of you on this vacation, Jen informed Brad as he brought her to her front door late in the afternoon. Jen gave Brad a hug. The intensity is gone, as is the illusion. Right now, all I want is Pete. I appreciate how much joy you provided me. However, it is now completed. It's over when I say it's over, Brad said quietly, staring at her. Either you don't have a job tomorrow, or you'll do me in bed tonight. Jen did not back down. I'm going to contact Pete and open the door. I am apologizing to him for my behavior. And now, if you're still with me, I hope you understand. I am confident that he can, since he is so much more of a man than you. Brad said, you are just a dumb 304 who likes to spread her legs for cheap thrills. You are just a big prick with a set of balls. Pete will fast realize that you are and will always be a 304. You will crawl back once he is gone. Brad turned and approached the automobile after saying this. And I may let you have me. Jen opened the door and dashed inside, grabbing for the phone when she spotted Pete's frantic scroll addressing her on the kitchen table. She gently ripped the letter from the envelope and read, Jen, you told me to take care of the water bubble in the shower door. He turned back and replied, I will have your desk contents boxed and shipped to you, even with your termination pay. First, let me say that you were wrong about the bubble not causing visible damage, but you were right in drawing a correlation between the water bubble and the cheating acts you were doing with Brad. If you had been here, you would have seen that each time the water bubble occurred, it left a small residue on the glass. Over time, the residue clouded the glass, and it was no longer. But also it is unhealthy to be around. Such as our marriage. Your actions have clouded our marriage and introduced unhealthy conditions. As with the shower door, there are 2 choices. Choice 1, repair the door. Take it apart and rebuild it. Choice 2, replace the door. Looking at our marriage, choice 1 was a possibility, until you decided to take the 2-week cruise with your lover. After that, no repair was possible in my mind. Choice 2 is my choice. I am replacing the shower door. I am replacing you. I am replacing our marriage. If you had not gone on your love cruise, you would have found your daughter and I waiting to try to repair the marriage. But after introducing the mold and mildew caused by your continued cheating on the cruise, the only option is to replace everything. Your actions are not only unhealthy, but are actually toxic to my love for you. You have killed my feelings for you. Stephanie and I left on the 3rd day of your cruise. We are now living in a place that will be hard for you to find us. You will be receiving divorce papers from my attorney on the day your cruise is over. The grounds are adultery. The cabin steward on the ship has been deposed, as have the people in Brad's apartment building about your antics. Also, the desk clerks at the various hotels you use for your early liaisons have provided testimony as to your adultery. I even have an audio tape of you talking to me on the phone in your feeble attempts at convincing me that your actions were just sex. I have reported Brad to his boss for using his position to have sex with you. He will be fired for cause upon his return to the office. His company is offering me a settlement to make the whole thing go away. I have no doubt that Brad will try to coerce you for continued sex. I believe he will eventually fire you if you don't give him what he wants and expects from you. He cannot hold any control over you at work or your private life. So hopefully you can keep your job. Although the staff will probably know what is going on. I hope you are thick-skinned because your job will be your only source of income. You are right. The water bubble is an exact representation of your actions and their results. If I were you, I would look at the shower door and see if you can ever find the jam I married. You can have the house if you can pay for the mortgage. I have signed my part of the house over to you. Now you can bring your friends with benefits into what was our home with no guilt. I took half the furniture so Stephanie and I can make a home for us. You can talk to Stephanie after we get settled. But I must insist that she never come to the house when you have men around you are not a very good role model for her. Soon-to-be ex-husband, Pete. John dropped the letter and fell on her knees to the floor. She had let sexual lust override the sensible side of her brain. She had lost her wonderful marriage and her best friend because of her animal responses to her lust for bread. She now had nothing but an empty house with a shower door containing a water bubble with